Hello, everybody. This is Joseph P. Farrell with news and views from the Nefarium on June 9th, 2016. And boy, the Nefarium has been busy. Just 3 days ago, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu visited Moscow for a personal summit meeting with President Vladimir Putin. And this is a huge story, and I'm going to be referencing three different articles about it. One from RT, the other from Russia's Sputnik magazine, and then finally an Israeli article about the appointment of a new defense minister, Avigdor Lieberman. And I'm going to start with that one because this is a hugely important story. Listen to this one very carefully. This is the Israeli news source, and I'm linking the three articles for you in this news and views. I'm going to skip down to the third paragraph in the Israeli article, and I want you to listen very carefully to the wording of this article. Quote, in an illustration of the growing alliance between their two countries, this time Netanyahu is scheduled to stay in Russia for an extended trip of 2.5 days. In other words, that would put him in Russia probably to today as I'm speaking before he leaves Russia, meeting other leading Russian officials as well as the Russian president. Now, Netanyahu's visit actually began on June 6th, 3 days ago. So his visit is just now ending, and I'm citing this Israeli source. But note that choice of words, alliance, all right? Continuing further down in the article, Russia, which supports Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad, has been heavily engaged in Syria on the side of the regime. While Israel considers the Assad regime a close ally of Iran, an enemy, and is still technically at war with it, Jerusalem and Moscow have seen their interests in Syria converge of late. Last year, Netanyahu and Putin reached a landmark agreement to coordinate all Israeli and Russian forces in and over the skies of Israel's northern neighbor. Skipping a paragraph now. While Russia is working to secure its own strategic interests in Syria, most crucially by preserving its naval and other military bases in western Syria, the Kremlin has made it clear that it has no interest in facilitating attacks against Israel and has allowed Israeli aircraft free movement over the skies of Syria. In return, among other things, Israel has committed to alerting Russia of impending airstrikes to ensure no Russian casualties and has allowed Russian aircraft to cross into Israeli airspace when operationally necessary. Please note that. Let me read that again. Israel has allowed Russian aircraft to cross into Israeli airspace when operationally necessary for its operations in southern Syria. Now, folks, that's a wow. Okay. Now, let me turn now to Sputnik. And this is one of two Russian sources I'm going to be using in this news and views. I want you to listen very carefully to what Sputnik says, because all of this is occasioned by the recent appointment of a right-wing defense minister, Avigdor Lieberman. And this has been provoking something approaching hysteria in the West. All right, now listen to what Sputnik says. These are the first three paragraphs of the Sputnik article. On Wednesday, U.S. State Department spokesman Mark Toner said that the U.S. has concerns about the new Israeli government formed earlier in the day when Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Israel Beitenu leader Avigdor Lieberman reached a political deal to bring about Lieberman's right-wing nationalist party into the ruling coalition. Yalon indicated that he decided to step down, this is the former defense minister, due to his lack of trust in Netanyahu's policies, with the two men sparring in recent weeks over the use of deadly force on neutralized Palestinian assailants. Prior to his resignation, the defense minister said that Israel had lost its moral compass for basic questions. Commenting on the political shuffle, Toner said that the State Department had, quote, seen reports from Israel describing the new government as the most right-wing coalition in Israel's history. And we know that many of its ministers have said they oppose a two-state solution, unquote, to the Palestinian problem. Now, let me skip a little bit further in the Sputnik assessment. Now, they're at this point interviewing an Israeli scholar at this point from the Begin Sadat Center for Strategic Studies, and the man's name is Ephraim Inbar, all right? Inbar, quote, also suggested that in reality, Lieberman is, quote, a big pragmatist, particularly on the Palestinian issue. He is himself a settler in Judea, and he has said on the record he is willing to leave his house for the sake of peace, unquote. Now, here comes the real nub, I think, of what's going on. This is again from Sputnik. Commenting on the recent deteriorations in relations between Washington and Tel Aviv, the scholar said that, quote, there are tensions between the American and Israeli government, partly because of the disastrous Iranian nuclear deal, and partly because the two leaders, Obama and Netanyahu, come from entirely different ideological inclinations. Obama is a bleeding liberal, while Netanyahu is a conservative. Of course, their views of the world and how international relations should be conducted are very different, unquote. Now that's Sputnik. Now here is RT, and this one is crucial as well because this one gives you a lot of information about what these two gentlemen are talking about. And this is dated the 7th of June, 2 days ago. And the RT article's entitled, Netanyahu arrives in Moscow for talks with Putin. Now, I'm quoting several paragraphs in this very short article because they're very important. Quote, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has arrived in Russia for talks with President Vladimir Putin. The leaders reportedly plan to discuss the conflict in Syria and the prospects for settling the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Stop right there, folks, and note what I just said. Russia is now involved in the talks about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and this cannot be good news to the Western oligarchs in London and Washington, and particularly in Washington. Now let me continue with RT. Netanyahu, accompanied by his wife Sarah, arrived at Vnukovo Airport on Monday to the warm welcome of the honor guard waiting by the runway. The Israeli Prime Minister is also being accompanied by Immigrant Absorption Minister Zeev Elkin and Agriculture Minister Yuri Ariel. Tuck that one in the back of your mind for a moment. Meeting with Putin on Tuesday, Netanyahu plans to discuss the implementation of positions agreed upon during Netanyahu's last visit to Moscow, placing a particular focus on coordination between the Israeli and Russian forces. Both sides are eager to abide by a so-called deconflicting mechanism put in place to assure that Russian jets can freely operate in Syrian airspace near Israel's borders. Now recall, the Israeli version of that was that Russian aircraft are being allowed, if operationally necessary, to fly over Israeli airspace. And again, folks, this is huge. This is as close as we're going to get, I think, before the year is out, to a seismic geopolitical earthquake. Now, continuing, quote, they will also discuss various regional issues, including the global fight against terrorism, the situation in and around Syria, and the diplomatic horizon between Israel and the Palestinians, as well as bilateral economic and trade cooperation and the strengthening of cultural and humanitarian ties, unquote, the Prime Minister's office said in a statement. Now, bear that one in mind, too, because this means everything's on the table. International terrorism, the Israeli-Palestinian issue, economic ties, the wider war against terrorism, and quote-unquote cultural and humanitarian ties. Now, I want to go to the last paragraph in this RT article. In addition, the Agriculture Minister is expected to sign a memorandum of understanding regarding cooperation in agriculture and advanced dairy industry technology. Jerusalem and Moscow will also sign a bilateral pensions agreement. Notice that, please. That's RT talking. You'll notice in the Israeli article, when they're referring to the Israeli government, it was referred to as Tel Aviv. In the RT article, the Israeli government is referred to as Jerusalem. All right. Now, folks, that is a huge little symbolic indicator of how far Russia is willing to go to gain Israeli cooperation in the region. And again, folks, this is huge. Let me continue. Jerusalem and Moscow will also sign a bilateral pensions agreement for Soviet Jews to be eligible for a Russian pension, unquote. Now, all of this adds up, in my opinion, folks, to something that I've been saying over and over, and now it's come home to roost, I think, and just beginning to come home to roost with Israel. We know that there has been bad blood between the Obama administration and the Netanyahu government, particularly over the Palestinian issue. But on the wider scale, I've been arguing that American unipolarism and the diplomatic blunders that we've seen occurring over the past few years, the Arab Spring, the whole Libya mess, the whole Syria mess, the whole pressing for war in Syria and Iran, this whole thing has placed our allies on the edge of revolt. And now I think the key sign of this is that Israel is opening up very clearly and without any shadow of a doubt to Russia. That agriculture agreement, I think, is hugely significant for the following reason. Russia has, of course, sworn itself off of GMOs. Now, if you're a religious state like Israel, this might mean that non-GMO food would be more according to practicing Jewish kosher laws. I don't know. You'd have to ask someone who's an expert in it. But I think this is yet another wedge that is being used very cleverly by the Russians. And I think in return, Israel has a lot of agricultural technology that they can offer to the Russians. Think about the fact that they have been sustaining an agricultural industry in Israel under harsh weather conditions, harsh climate conditions. This could be of benefit to Russia. So add all of this together, and I think you're looking at the beginnings of a seismic earthquake. And this isn't going to go away anytime soon for the following reason. The articles have mentioned very specifically that deal with Iran on its nuclear projects, which Israel continues to regard as a very, very disastrous deal as far as Israel is concerned. Russia is an ally of Iran. So Russia can act as mediator and go-between, and this too, I think, is going to make Russian-Israeli relations be a little bit closer. They may not be entirely always existing on parallel tracks, certainly. But I think Russia has played this card very, very carefully, and we're going to see more of it. I don't think that this is going to turn out to be a temporary thing on Israel's part or Russia's. Time will tell. But one thing it's signaling is the unipolar era, and they better get a clue in Washington and London very fast. The unipolar era is quickly coming to a close. Israel may not bolt from the special relationship with America, but it's certainly clear from these articles that they're reassessing it in a big way. So that's it for today's news and views. Watch that story, folks. It's important. I'll see everybody on the flip side. And bye-bye, and God bless.